Hello, welcome to Planet America's Fireside Chat. I'm John Barron.
And I'm Chaz Chidello.
The October surprise of all October surprises today. President Trump has COVID-19. The campaign and indeed the Trump presidency has been thrown into complete chaos.
We're going to look at what this might mean for Trump's re-election campaign, as well as the week's other top stories, including the most out-of-control presidential debate ever.
But first to the news that has sent shockwaves around the world in the past few hours. First, reports presidential advisor Hope Hicks had tested positive to the coronavirus just hours after returning from a Trump rally in Minnesota on Air Force One with President Trump. She'd also flown with the president to Cleveland, Ohio for the debate on Tuesday night, US time. First, the president tweeted that he and First Lady Melania Trump were in quarantine. But then, within hours, came the confirmation. They had tested positive. The tweet said, "Tonight, FLOTUS, First Lady Melania Trump, and I tested positive for COVID-19. We will begin our quarantine and recovery process immediately. We will get through this together," the president said. Now, as we speak, most Americans are waking up to this news just 31 days from their presidential election, with millions of early votes already being cast. The President of the United States has a potentially fatal disease. We don't yet know how far the infection has reached either. Other senior staff are being tested. Vice President Mike Pence is also believed to have been in contact with both Hope Hicks and President Trump in recent days. And of course, if President Trump was already carrying the virus during the debate on Tuesday night, where he was socially distant but still in proximity of former Vice President Joe Biden, when he was still downplaying the need to wear face masks at all and mocking Biden for doing so.
You have to understand, if you look, I mean, I have a mask right here. I put a mask on, when I think I need it. Tonight, as an example, everybody's had a test and you've had social distancing and all of the things that you have to, but I wear masks when needed. When needed, I wear masks.
Okay, let me ask.
I don't wear masks like him. Every time you see him, he's got a mask. He could be speaking 200 feet away from it, he shows up with the biggest mask I've ever seen.
And that, for me, was the funniest moment of the debate. Doesn't seem
so funny now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's
And,
funny how
and
that
that
goes.
is, I guess, in a political sense, if we put aside for just one moment the health concerns about President Trump and other White House staff and First Lady Melania Trump, but that President Trump put a flag in the ground quite early this year as being the guy who was against masks, even though he was early on getting advice to that effect, particularly when they were concerned about preserving PPE for first responders and hospital staff and so on. But that President Trump has been seen to be downplaying the infectiousness of this disease and the deadliness of this disease. This is potentially very politically damaging for him, I would say.
Potentially, but we'll talk about that more later. Let's talk about the person first, Donald Trump, who is sick. Okay, the first thing everyone does in this scenario is they either go straight to the stats. They try to look for what's the percentage chance of something bad happening. I'll tell you the numbers as they exist. The CDC numbers as of August 22, the case fatality rate, obviously the worst case scenario, that's deaths divided by confirmed cases in America for patients over 65 is nearly 16%. Now that is 65 all the way up into the 80s, all right, which is older than Trump. So the number's probably a little less for someone Trump's age. Those numbers are very different in different countries, different scenarios, but they're the CDC numbers. Trump's obviously older than 65. He's a man, the rates are higher for a man. He's also obese. And analysis from obesity reviews finds that people with obesity who contract COVID are 113% more likely than people of healthy weight to land in hospital, and 48% more likely to die. Now that's obviously...
Which is one of the reasons why people now believe the United States has suffered a significantly higher mortality rate than a number of nations because, as we've known for decades, America is a fat country.
Yeah. Now I emphasise, those numbers are from the beginning, right? A lot of people died early on because they didn't know what they were doing, nursing home disasters, all the rest of it, okay? So that's not predictive in any way, shape or form. And I am not a doctor. So we probably should talk to one.
Yes, let's get an expert opinion on that from one of Australia's and indeed the world's leading infectious diseases experts, Professor Peter Collignon. Peter, welcome to the program. Donald Trump, on the barest of known health statistics, he's 74 years old. He is technically obese at over 110 kilograms, a BMI of over 30. He doesn't drink or smoke, and he is apparently not diabetic or pre-diabetic. Based on those bare numbers, can you guess at how at risk he might be of serious complications from COVID-19?
Well, the exact number in an individual is difficult, but he's obviously more at risk because he's older. If you're between the age of 45 and 55, your chance of dying from COVID is about 0.2%. But once you get to 65 to 75, it goes up to 2%. And the higher you are in that, or the older you are in that age group, the higher the risk. And obviously, if you're overweight, that's an extra risk on top of that as well. Now, the trouble is, it also depends on how you go, because he, at the moment, I understand, is asymptomatic and was found because he had a swab, I presume, because one of his close contacts actually had COVID. So if he stays asymptomatic, well, that's actually good. But if we remember what happened with Boris Johnson, he had COVID and didn't look too bad for about a week or so, and then deteriorated and needed to go to hospital and, in fact, to ICU. So that's still a possibility. But in an individual, you can just say, look, these are what the chances are. And the overall chances is he'll recover from this and won't die, given the overall numbers. But he has still got a reasonable chance of, first of all, getting very sick and maybe needing hospital care, but also even, mortality is a significant risk at probably a few percent at his age and by being overweight.
Doctor, if Trump experiences symptoms, how long could he expect to experience those symptoms for?
Well, again, that's variable. I mean, what happens is people start off being asymptomatic. They have virus usually a day or two before they get symptoms. And the symptoms in a lot of people can be very mild, and then they get over it. They're just infectious to others. But if it progresses, what you would expect is multiplication in your nose, the back of your throat, your upper airways, and you'll probably develop a cough. You might get slightly short of breath, although that's more an indication that it's gone further and it's gone into your lungs. And obviously, if it goes into your lungs, that's a problem, because that's the people who get severe COVID. And in some people, you can also get heart complications. Now, the only good news, if you look at this, is if you look at nursing home studies more recently done, and also cruise ships where a lot of people are in their 70s and 80s, about half the people that are found remain asymptomatic, interestingly. So obviously, if you're in that group, it's not good for others because you can transmit it to others. But for you as an individual, it's pretty good, although a lot of people with COVID will end up with symptoms for many weeks and sometimes months afterwards, where they have fatigue and tiredness.
Peter, we do know, based on the President's public itinerary in the last 3 days, he has been on Air Force One a number of times to the debate in Cleveland, Ohio. He stood for 90 minutes next to former Vice President Joe Biden. He went to a rally in Minnesota, attended by thousands of people. Who is at most risk of catching this from the President? People on Air Force One, Joe Biden, who was 5 metres away from him for an hour and a half, people at that rally. Who would you be most concerned about?
Well, you can't. Well, the people you're most concerned about are those who are close indoors for a prolonged period of time. And that's why household contacts have got a much higher risk. Household contacts, to put it into context, if you're in the same house as somebody, even sleeping in the same bed, if your spouses, etc., there's probably between a 10 and 20% chance you're going to get it. And obviously, the lower your contact, the lower the time, and the further you're away, the lower that probability. But there's rules in Australia where we look at what we call a close contact, and they need to isolate and get tested. And that's often if people, for instance, are close to somebody for 15 minutes within 1.5 meters with no contact in particular, they're at high risk. So I presume the American public health people will look at that, and anybody who's been within a close contact, not wearing a mask in particular for any prolonged period of time, particularly if it's indoors, they're the ones that most have to worry. The people that are within 2 meters, 1.5 meters of Mr. Trump for particularly more than 10 or 15 minutes.
And Doctor, the medicines and treatments that we're now using, like medicines like, say, remdesivir, dexamethasone, are they more effective when you treat someone early before they have symptoms, or does it make no difference?
Well, it probably won't necessarily make a lot of difference. The only therapy that might actually improve you if you get it early is what we call plasma or antibodies from people who have recovered, or they've even got monoclonal ones now. The steroids, the dexamethasone, that does decrease mortality, but only in people who are very sick or on a ventilator. So getting that early probably doesn't do any good. In fact, it might do you harm. And all the other antiviral drugs, they have some benefit, but it's not flash. Even remdesivir, for instance, instead of being in hospital for 15 days, you're in hospital for 11 days. It doesn't obviously decrease mortality. So the main therapy is supportive, making sure people get enough oxygen if they need it, making sure if they need to go on a ventilator, they get it, making sure they have enough fluids, and particularly clots and, clotting in your veins and getting clots going to your lung is more common if you've got COVID. So there are precautions you can take with other drugs to decrease your chance of taking that. So people are looked after much better now than 4 or 5 months ago. There's a lower mortality, probably because it's associated with better medical care and knowing more of the complications and being able to address those early than what this was the situation, say, in March and April.
A final question for you, Peter Collignon. What is the best case scenario for President Trump? The CDC guidelines say that if you go into quarantine, you need to be there for 14 days. That puts the second presidential debate very much in doubt. What would be the soonest that President Trump could emerge from quarantine, assuming all is well?
Well, I think the earliest would be probably 14 days, because I think you've got to assume that people are infectious for at least 7 to 10 days after they come down with infection. And if he's asymptomatic at the moment, that may not be for another couple of days before he develops symptoms. So if you get mild illness or you're asymptomatic, you can presumably work from your office and, do Zoom conferences or even debates. But I would think he needs to avoid anyone for probably the next 14 days at least. Until, first of all, he's in a good frame of mind and good health to be able to make decisions and speaks, appropriately. And secondly, that he's not a risk to others, which will be, I think, at least 10 or 14 days from now.
Professor, thanks for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
Now, Chaz, one of the questions that's been asked of me the most in the last few hours on social media and elsewhere is, well, what happens if President Trump, 1, dies, or 2, becomes so ill that he can't be president? What happens there? That all comes down to the 25th Amendment of the United States Constitution. Section 1 is the most severe one. That's regarding death. It says that in case of the removal of the president from office or of his death or resignation, the vice president shall become president. So Mike Pence becomes president anytime between now and midday on the 20th of January, no matter what the election outcome is. The election will happen on the 3rd of November. Even though President Trump is on the ballot, Mike Pence would still succeed to the office prior to January the 20th, and then whoever wins the Electoral College will become president. Maybe Mike Pence, maybe Joe Biden at that stage. Section 3 talks about what happens in illness or incapacity, and that's usually invoked. Section 3, it's only been invoked a few times when
Ronald Reagan
had a colonoscopy.
Yep.
George W. Bush had a couple of colonoscopies as well. That's when they know they're going in for a procedure with a general anaesthetic. They sign a letter over to the Speaker of the House and the President pro tempore of the Senate, Chuck Grassley, saying basically, I'm going under. The Vice President is president until I send you another letter saying, hey, I'm back, which of course means that if there are complications and they are incapacitated, in a coma, die from surgery, etc., again, the Vice President is in control. Then, of course, there's the possibility of Donald Trump holds on to office, doesn't sign a letter, but under Section 4, if he is perhaps comatose, then it takes the Vice President and at least half the members of Cabinet to say, well, the President can't be President. He can't make decisions like whether to, press the big red button on the desk. So at that point, you need half the Cabinet to write to the Congress and say the President should be removed from office. Vice President Mike Pence becomes acting President of the United States. That is also the section that some people were kind of hoping would be invoked when they said Trump's crazy, he should be removed from office. So those are the options that are open right there. But it does throw this huge question mark, and also a huge question mark over next week's vice presidential debate with Mike Pence and Kamala Harris, because we could be in a situation next week where Mike Pence becomes acting president of the United States, and a question as to whether that debate should proceed or whether we are effectively seeing a new presidential debate. And then questions about, would Mike Pence then go and conduct the next 2 presidential debates against Joe Biden? All sorts of possibilities, and we are in literally uncharted waters there.
We absolutely are. And I should say that if the worst happened before the election and he died, then Mike Pence would be president, but not necessarily the Republican nominee for president. They would have to choose him, and they would choose Mike Pence, obviously, at this late date, but they don't have to.
Yes, it's not a constitutional requirement in the same way as if Vice President Biden had been exposed to the coronavirus either by President Trump or his staff or by somebody else. But if Joe Biden would also become ill, which is not impossible, and again, a man in his late 70s in Biden's case could also run the risk of serious complications. If he was unable to stand at the election, then the Democratic Party would have to go through a nomination process, which they do very quickly and on the internet, and Kamala Harris would presumably become the nominee, but that's not automatic. There's no constitutional assumption of that power.
The question is, though, the more likely scenarios where he's either remains asymptomatic or becomes mildly symptomatic. How does campaigning work? Right. I imagine, like for a start, he can't campaign for 2 weeks, regardless. I imagine Joe Biden.
Well, he can't go to rallies, but he can do the Joe Biden's basement campaign.
He can. I imagine whatever he does, Joe Biden will happily match him. I don't think Joe Biden's going to complain about that. But if it becomes seriously symptomatic, if he's sick, if he's not dead, but he's sick and he's in hospital, what, do we just call off the election campaign for the next 5 weeks and then there's an election without a campaign? Yeah.
Well, I mean, as we'll see a little later in the program, President Trump is behind in his re-election, badly behind, just over a month out from the election. And he put in a pretty shocking debate performance this week as well. Well, it's going to be interesting to find out whether he was experiencing any symptoms earlier in the week, whether that affected his performance at all. There are some people saying that he was hot, he was sweating, he was carrying on, etc. We just don't know. As for the impact that this could have, I mean, to an extent, that is very much determined on whether the president sails through this as on a human level. We would hope that he is fine.
And his doctor says at the moment he is well, whatever that means.
Yeah. And the guy, he doesn't drink, he doesn't smoke, he has no history of respiratory problems, which is one of the big risk factors as well. But he is a big guy. So if Trump is largely asymptomatic, if he gets a light dose of this and he's back out on the campaign trail in a couple of weeks, is there any way he can turn this to his advantage and say, see, it wasn't that bad after all, I don't know what all the fuss about? Or does the fact that there are already 205,000 dead Americans mean he can't possibly say that? He has to be gracious. He has to say, I'm lucky I got the best possible medical care. I've recovered. Now's the time for America to recover. How does he spin this to a positive?
Look, I think firstly, we don't know how this is going to play. There's so many variables at this point in time. People might start feeling sympathetic towards him. Maybe he's not affected at all. He comes out, Mr. Strongman, I beat it. He might turn it into a hydroxychloroquine thing, for all we know. We have no idea.
We know that hydroxychloroquine didn't work as a prophylactic now, at least.
Well, he wasn't taking it now. He only took it months ago.
So he's going to say, I shouldn't have stopped. All those people told me to stop.
We have no idea where this is going to go.
Yeah.
What we do know is that at least for the next 2 weeks, we're going to be talking about nothing but COVID, and that is always bad news for Trump.
Right, so Trump puts that back on the agenda where he was hoping that anything else, the Supreme Court, I mean, who cares about the Supreme Court? All of a sudden we have a president with a potentially life-threatening illness, even though his chances of survival are good, objectively. This is still potentially a big deal. But what if this does go further? What if Mike Pence is infected? What if, I mean, the inner circle, First Lady Melania Trump has also got this illness. This is the stuff of thriller novels. That there's a contagion that gets into the residents, not just the West Wing.
Well, look, there are a lot of people who make contact with Trump without masks, close contact, because everyone's getting tested, so they all act like they're safe, essentially. And if someone gets through.
And there's the question of trust as well. Donald Trump literally wrote his own doctor's letter who said he was the fittest, most vibrant person ever sworn in as President of the United States. In the next 2 weeks, a large number of people are going to believe it when they see on social media that Trump is really sicker. There's now a body double for Trump. I mean, this could get crazy town very quickly. It
could. Let me just ask you, just to go back a little bit. Let's take the hospitalised situation. He's not dying, but he's in hospital for a month. Is there any chance at all that the Congress agrees to pass a bill to delay the election 2 or 3 weeks? Because, they might just say it's not fair. It's just not fair. For even though Joe Biden stops campaigning, it's just not fair to have one person in hospital for the month before the election.
I think given how much
They need to pass a bill for that to happen.
Well, I think there's very, very little chance that the Democratic majority in the House would consider passing such a bill, given that President Trump has already floated the idea earlier in the year of delaying the election because of coronavirus. He wasn't saying about him getting coronavirus, but given the amount of mischief that he has made casting doubts over this election process itself, I think the potential chaos of rescheduling the election, and then what do you do if Joe Biden gets sick?
Yeah.
Do we say, OK, we're going to make the election, in February next year? I don't imagine that could possibly happen. Yeah. But look, before this came along, Chaz, we thought the biggest story of the week was going to be that incredible debate. The fallout continues from what was a very, very messy first encounter. And there could be an upside to all of this. That may just be the only debate we get to see between President Trump and former Vice President Joe Biden. Apart from the constant interjections from Donald Trump, which has now brought about a change in rules if there is a second debate in 2 weeks from now, a lot of the criticism afterwards centred around this exchange in particular.
Are you willing tonight to condemn white supremacists and militia groups and to say that they need to stand down and not add to the violence in a number of these cities, as we saw in Kenosha and as we've seen in Portland?
Sure,
are you
I'm
prepared
to do
specifically
that,
do it? Well, go ahead, sir.
I would say almost everything I see is from the left wing, not from the right wing.
So what are you saying?
I'm willing to do anything. I want to see peace.
Then do it, sir.
Say it. Do it. Say it.
Do you want to call him? What do you want to call them? Give me a name. Give me a
white
name.
Supremacists and
who would you like me to condemn?
White supremacists and right
Proud Boys, stand back and stand by. But I'll tell you what. Somebody's got to do something about Antifa and the left.
Telling white nationalists to stand back and stand by, that was pretty bad. Bad enough for the usually very Trump-friendly Brian Kilmeade on Fox and Friends to say this.
But Donald Trump blew the biggest layup in the history of debates by saying not condemning white supremacists. I don't know if he didn't hear it, but he's got to clarify that right away. That's like, are you against evil? Why the president didn't just knock that out of the park, I'm not sure.
Well, here's an interesting theory from the former Republican Senator Rick Santorum, who basically said it was Chris Wallace's fault.
He was asking the president to do something that he knows the president doesn't like to do.
Which is?
Which is say something bad about people who support him, right?
What, declining violence?
Well, talking about
the white
supremacy?
The white supremacists.
Which, as shocking as it may seem, Rick Santorum may be very close to the truth there. Anyway, later that afternoon, with growing calls from the likes of Republican Senator Tim Scott to clarify the comments in the debate, it was clearly time for a presidential do-over.
I don't know who the Proud Boys are. I mean, you'll have to give me a definition because I really don't know who they are. I can only say they have to stand down, let law enforcement do their work.
OK, stand down, but don't stand by. Still a bit too respectful to neo-Nazis for many people's comfort, Chaz, but certainly an improvement of what he said on the debate. But what do you think of that from Rick Santorum? Because I kind of felt that whether you think that Trump is a racist or pandering to racists or not, it's very consistent with a lot of the seemingly outrageous things that he says or will not say, not just about white nationalists, but about Vladimir Putin and a whole bunch of others. He just doesn't have it in him to criticise somebody who says nice things about him. He just can't do it.
I think that is true. I mean, we all recall, I think, what he said about Jeffrey Epstein's offside.
Yeah, sure.
I couldn't condemn her because she's been nice to him in the past.
Right.
I actually take it further than Rick Santorum, though. I'd say it's not just about him not condemning people who are nice to him, but also he doesn't like to take a backward step. When someone tries to corner him into doing anything, he just instinctively refuses to do it. And it's quite childish and it gets him into trouble. But I think this is part of what that is. He thinks it shows strength to not be cajoled into doing anything.
Yeah, but I mean, in a way, we have seen this movie before.
Oh, yeah.
David Duke, former Grand Wizard of Ku Klux Klan, endorsed Trump in 2016, and Trump refused to renounce the support of the KKK.
And also said he didn't know who David Duke was, even though he did know who David Duke was. And by the way, on the Proud Boys, they're on Tucker Carlson every second day. Trump watches a lot of Tucker Carlson. He knows who the Proud Boys are.
Yeah, and for those those that don't know, we don't necessarily give them sort of too much publicity, but they are a group that advocates very violent, basically inciting Trump supporters to violence and going into situations such as we've seen over the Black Lives Matter protests and just attacking people. The kind of YouTube videos that their founder puts out is advocating just assault.
Yeah, the founder, Gareth McInnes, he does advocate violence openly.
He makes Alex Jones look sane, that guy. I mean, he's out there.
He does. Look, I was one of the people who was saying, Trump didn't necessarily mean stand by, as in stand by, wait for my signal, as if he'd written it out. Like he was dribbling on his way to say what he really wanted to say, which was, how about Antifa? Which is what he said about 5 seconds later. A lot of the right have pointed out that when he was first told, are you going to denounce these people? He said, sure. They said, well, there you go. He was happy to denounce them. But see, for me, it doesn't matter whether he actually meant it as it was taken or not, or whether he just did a poor job of dealing with it. Brian Kilmeade's right. That is the easiest question in the world to answer. He isn't a novice president now. He's been there for 4 years. This has happened so many times. I'm not saying that he is sympathetic to white nationalists or anything like that. He's condemned them big time once or twice before, okay? It's happened, right? He has condemned them.
Usually after failing to condemn them a number of times and then 3 days later is forced to go out and condemn them.
Well, after the El Paso shooting in particular, he gave a big speech off the auto cue where he condemned them heavily.
Yeah. But which was after Charlottesville.
Yes.
And after he had done that both sidesism. And frankly, this week, he wasn't saying there are bad people on both sides. He was essentially saying the real problem is Antifa.
He was. I'm not making an excuse for him here. I'm saying it's enough time has passed, and this has happened enough times. He should be able to answer a basic question without people making excuses for him.
Yeah.
And so I think he's out of credits in this regard, personally. The problem for me is, regardless of what his intentions were, the Proud Boys interpreted it as explicit encouragement. One prominent Proud Boy wrote at the time, Trump basically told us to go F them up. This makes me so happy. And then another Proud Boy immediately incorporated Trump's phrase into their logo. So in the end, whether Trump meant it to be an encouragement of extremism or not, that is its effect. And he's the president. So that's all that matters. He should know better.
Yeah, well, as for who won the debate, this guy has an opinion.
I won the debate big, based on a compilation of polls, etc. Thank you.
And as to the evidence for that, the White House cited a poll from C-SPAN that did have Trump winning 53 to 29, and another from Telemundo that had Trump winning by 64 to 34%. But those polls were taken on Twitter, where literally anybody can vote. There is no breakdown of demographics or likely voters. It is basically what is referred to in the business as a junk poll. The only scientific polls suggest a very different result. CNBC gave the debate to Biden, 53 to 29, while only 2% said it would actually change their vote. A CBS poll of debate watchers gave it to Biden by 8 points, while a CNN poll gave it to Biden by more than 30 points.
Well, we're running hot. A few more reactions. First from 538. They, with Ipsos, polled the same voters before and after the debate, and they found in that same group, net favourables for Trump fell from minus 23% to minus 26%. That's 26 points lower favourables than unfavourables. Whereas for Biden, net favourables rose from +2 to +7. It's not a massive amount of movement, but moving in the wrong direction for Trump. 33% of the voting sample thought Trump performed well on the night, to 60% who said Biden performed well, and 66% said Trump performed poorly on the night, compared to 39% who said Biden did. Now, Data for Progress went one better, and they actually weighted their sample according to the demographics of the 2016 election, and they got a win to Biden by 52 to 39. 53 to 33 described Biden as more presidential during the debate, 53 to 33 that was. And this is the big one. Given Trump's whole strategy was to make Biden look doddery and feeble, when asked who was more mentally sharp and stable, they said Biden was 46 to 42. Now, there's one more potential reaction, though, to what we saw on Tuesday night, and it's what pollster Frank Luntz found in a focus group of 16 undecided voters. He wrote, "This debate has actually convinced some undecided voters to not vote at all. I've never seen a debate cause this reaction." Now, I'm not sure Trump would have set out to dispirit voters when he interrupted people 71 times out of 93 interruptions in total. But that's according to the Washington Post. But I certainly felt dispirited watching that debate, so I understood where they were coming from.
Yeah, and that's it would be, if it is a deliberate ploy from President Trump, that would be a very clever ploy, because depressing the overall turnout, you're robbing Joe Biden of votes. It's one thing to be competing for the one vote, but if you have somebody stay at home, well, that gets you one vote closer to winning some of these states.
And the reason for that is because his voters are massively enthusiastic. They're going to vote for him no matter what. His vote is baked in.
Yes.
If there's a high vote, Biden does better.
Yeah, well, we saw that poll that said only 2% of voters changed their mind, and the favourables and unfavourables shifted a little bit. We're talking about small numbers there. There could be some evidence emerging of an overall post-debate bounce for Joe Biden, his national lead blowing out to 13 points in a CNBC Change Research poll, which covered the day before and the day after the debate. A 4-day poll from YouGov, which only included one post-debate day on Wednesday in the US, had Joe Biden 8 points ahead. His average lead is still pretty steady at around that 7 points, that according to Real Clear Politics. Some of the other polling averages that are coming online now are putting it 8.5, but we're still in that general ballpark.
Sure. Before we leave the polls, I've got a poll for you.
Yeah.
Now, I know we've spoken a few times about how Trump's team is supposedly knocking on 1 million doors a week compared to Biden's 0. And every time I say that, you always say...
But how many times are people answering the doors?
Here's your answer. According to Morning Consult, 63% of voters said they felt apprehensive about answering the door for canvassers, while just 28% said they were comfortable with it. And that's interesting. But here is the other side of the coin. Those door knockers are trying to get people registered to vote. That's why they're there. And between March and August, Republicans added 195,000 registered voters in Florida alone, compared to the Democrats, who added 98,000. Independents added 69,000, and in Pennsylvania, Republicans added 135,000 registrations to the Democrats, adding 57,000. And independents adding 50,000. Now that doesn't necessarily mean anything, but it's certainly worth noting. And if Trump wins Florida and Pennsylvania, we'll come back to that. It does also match up with a curious complacency, I think, from the Biden campaign, which is they ended campaigning or called a lid before midday 12 times during the month of September. Now that is unheard of. I've got no idea what they are playing at there, John.
Yeah, I was wondering until I saw the debate whether that was all just debate preparation from Joe Biden. But his performance, he wasn't bad, but it didn't suggest that he was, resting up and doing lots of debate prep, because, certainly Joe Biden has significant room for improvement to hone his answers. There, we had criticisms of Donald Trump missing a few layups. Well, Joe Biden, he got some good lines away, but I think in many ways Biden's performance in the debate looks better in the highlight reel than it did at the time. And interesting, those polls talking about, did somebody look sharp or did somebody look stable? Well, I think the reality is Trump looked sharper than Biden did, but Biden looked an awful lot more stable than Trump did overall. Trump is still very, very quick on his feet, chipping away, getting in there, etc. He's pugilistic, he's instinctive, and he doesn't think twice. It's just straight brain to mouth. Some would argue that it's not even that complicated a process. But in Joe Biden's case, he's often, he's trying to think about what he is going to say. He fumbles for the words. Obviously, he's got his speech impediment, which means that there are words that he tries to avoid. But he's slowed down a lot. He's slowed down dramatically. If you go back to the debates that he did in 2008 and 2012, I'm not buying into the Joe Biden has dementia thing, but I think we can also acknowledge that, honestly, Joe Biden at the age of 77 is different to Joe Biden at the age of 66. Which is what he was when he was first doing those vice presidential debates. He's an older, slower man.
Yeah, I agree. There were many times during the debate where you go, yeah, that's almost there, but just not quite.
Yeah.
It's just always a little bit slow or not quite the right word, always fumbling around. Yeah, I do agree with that. Perhaps it's foolish to get into the substance of the debate, but I do want to address some of the many claims and counterclaims made on the night, because they were both at each other with all kinds of claims, right? I'll start with Biden. He made this dubious-sounding claim.
Just take a look at what is the analysis done by Wall Street firms. Points out that my economic plan would create 7 million more jobs than his in 4 years.
But he was right. Moody's made an assessment of the possible outcomes last week, and they projected that by the end of 2024, a Democratic sweep would result in 7.4 million more jobs, 4.5% larger GDP, also higher disposable incomes, a higher stock market level, and even emerging from the recession 2 years earlier than America would under a Republican sweep. Now, they might be wrong, but it's still worth mentioning. Talking about the economy, there was a message that Biden tried to get out there throughout the debate.
We handed him a booming economy. He blew it.
It wasn't
he blew
booming.
it. We left him a booming economy, and he caused a recession. We didn't shut down the economy. This is his economy he shut down.
Okay, so he reckons Obama handed a booming economy to Trump, and Trump destroyed it. Well, firstly, the New York Times fact checker disagrees the economy was booming in 2016. They note that growth dipped below 2% during the year because of a contraction in business investment. Secondly, it is incredibly cynical for Biden to blame Trump for shutting down the economy during the coronavirus outbreak, when for most of the year, Biden's been criticising Trump for not taking coronavirus seriously enough. In fact, I'd describe the argument as a bit shameless. Next.
You talk about helping African Americans. 1 in 1,000 African Americans has been killed because of the coronavirus. And if he doesn't do something quickly, by the end of the year, 1 in 500 will have been killed. 1 in 500 African Americans.
And that is true. According to the APM Research Lab, about 1 in 1,020 black Americans have died so far due to COVID. And the IHME model projects the total deaths to double by the end of the year generally. Now, that model has been consistently super wrong, but it's fair enough for Biden to quote them. Finally, this claim.
This is a FBI director.
This is a left-wing
white supremacist. Antifa's an idea, not an organization.
Oh, you got it.
Not militia. That's what his FBI. His FBI director said.
Well, then you know what?
No, we're done, sir.
They were done. Now, Biden might have gotten slightly confused there. FBI Director Christopher Wray told Congress that Antifa was more of an ideology or a movement than an organisation. He didn't say they were an idea, which sounds a little bit sillier. So it's close, but not quite. Turning to Trump. He said this about masks.
His own head of the CDC said if we just wore masks between now, everybody wore masks in social distance between now and January, we'd probably save up to 100,000 lives. It matters.
And they've also said the opposite. They've also said the opposite.
No serious person said the opposite.
Well, look
serious
at Dr. Fauci. Dr. Fauci said the opposite.
He did not say the opposite.
I want to ask you, we got a little bit more than a minute left in this
segment. Masks are not good. Then he changed his mind. He said masks are good.
And Trump's kind of right. Fauci did always maintain they didn't object to people wearing masks if they wanted to, but he also said this.
Right now in the United States, people should not be walking around with masks.
You're sure of it? Because people are listening really closely to this.
Right now, people should not be walking. There's no reason to be walking around with a mask. When you're in the middle of an outbreak, wearing a mask might make people feel a little bit better, and it might even block a droplet, but it's not providing the perfect protection that people think that it is. And often, there are unintended consequences. People keep fiddling with the mask and they keep touching their face.
Trump also claimed that Biden was lying about where he went to uni.
Did you use the word smart? So you said you went to Delaware State, but you forgot the name of your college.
He was presumably referring to this clip last year.
I got started out of an HBCU, Delaware State. Now, I don't want to hear anything negative about Delaware State here, okay? They're my folks. But all kidding aside, the fact is that HBCUs are in trouble financially.
Biden said there that he started out at Delaware State, not that he attended Delaware State. Delaware State was where he launched his first senatorial campaign. And Trump also accused Biden of being the real military abuser.
What he did is
you're done in this segment.
He called the military
Vice President,
stupid bastards.
I
and he
did
said
not
it on
say
tape. He said stupid bastards.
Please,
He said it.
Stop.
I would never say that to the military.
Play it.
Sure, we'll play it. This is what Biden said in 2016.
And two, I appointed Johnson to the academy. I just want you to know that. Clap for that, you stupid bastard.
You judge for yourself. To me, he was obviously joking. But, John, the claim that Trump wanted to get out there more than any other by a mile concerned Hunter Biden. So tell us all about that one.
Yeah, and like a lot of the things that Trump was throwing out there during the debate, he wasn't bothering to throw out much context. He was just throwing out kind of, and there was this, and there was this, and there was this, which kind of relied on you to either be watching Fox News or Googling actively to find out what he actually meant. But this one definitely needs a bit of further explaining because it is the latest attack line being used by Trump and his supporters. Take a look.
Just out of curiosity, the mayor of Moscow's wife gave your son $3.5 million. What did he do to deserve it? What did he do with Burisma to deserve $183,000?
None of that is true. Let him answer.
None of that is true.
Oh, really? He didn't get
$3.5 million? Mr. President,
Mr.
President, please.
Totally discredited. Totally discredited. And by the way,
well, wait, he didn't get $3.5 million, Joe?
Mr. Vice,
he got $3.5 million.
That is not true.
Oh, really?
Mr. President, it's an open discussion, please.
It's a fact.
Well, you have raised an issue. Let the Vice President answer.
Discredited.
Did Burisma pay him $183,000 a month with no experience in energy?
Mr. President,
my son did nothing wrong at Burisma.
I think he did.
Mr. President, let him answer.
He doesn't want to let me answer because he knows I have the truth. His position has been totally, thoroughly discredited.
By who?
And you
The media?
By everybody. Well, by the media, by our allies, by the World Bank, by everyone.
That pause summed up an awful lot. But did Joe Biden's son Hunter get $3.5 million from the wife of the mayor of Moscow, as the president says? Well, the White House says the source of that allegation is from the joint report from the US Senate Committees on Homeland Security and Finance, which was entitled Hunter Biden, Burisma and Corruption, the Impact on US Government Policy and Related Concerns. It was authored by staff of the Republican-dominated committees, and it claims in February 2014, Alina Baturina, the billionaire widow of a former Moscow mayor, wired $3.5 million to a Rosemont Seneca Thornton bank account for a, quote, consultancy agreement. The report states that Rosemont Seneca Thornton is an investment firm co-founded by Hunter Biden. The report goes on to say that Rosemont was investing that money in a New York-based Chinese-backed computer tablet maker named Back USA, which, by the way, went broke last year. But according to PolitiFact, Hunter Biden's lawyer, George Mazzeri, said that Biden did not get $3.5 million and that the report has a key error. He says Hunter Biden had no interest in and was not a co-founder of Rosemont Seneca Thornton. So the claim that he was paid $3.5 million is false. Now, that is a pretty flat-out denial, although Hunter Biden's lawyers haven't provided documentation to prove that he has no interest in Rosemont Seneca Thornton. Republican staff didn't respond to the fact-checkers' questions about whether they had evidence that Hunter Biden was involved. The committee's source is a newspaper report from the Financial Times from October last year. Democrats on the committee say that they're aware of no information in the committee's possession showing that Hunter Biden had any financial interest in that entity or transaction. But what would be the big deal anyway? Hunter Biden was working for an investment firm at one time. He invested some money for a client. It's hard to say what this is all about, except to say that it somehow relates to this already debunked conspiracy theory that Trump associates like Rudy Giuliani have been peddling for more than 18 months, the same conspiracy theory that got Trump impeached for trying to get Ukraine to dig dirt on the Bidens last year. What Rudy and others want to prove is that when Hunter Biden was getting paid hundreds of thousands of dollars a month to sit on the board of the Ukrainian gas company Burisma, his father, the vice president at the time, who was running the Obama administration's Ukraine policy, they want to argue that he forced the Ukrainian government to sack the prosecutor general, Viktor Shokin. Now, Trump and Giuliani believe that Joe Biden forced the Ukrainians to sack Shokin because Shokin was investigating Burisma for corruption and maybe implicating Hunter Biden in that corruption. Unfortunately, it's a nice idea to be very convenient, but the reality seems to be rather different. Shokin He was sacked for not being aggressive enough investigating corruption. It wasn't just Joe Biden who was saying that Shokin should be sacked. It was Obama administration policy. It was the European Union calling for it. It was the International Monetary Fund saying, sack this guy because he's doing a terrible job. He's not investigating corruption. He's corrupt himself. But to help try and prove that Joe Biden was protecting his son Hunter, Trump and his allies need to keep suggesting that Hunter Biden is very, very dodgy. Which is why we also had this extraordinary and very personal attack in the debate as well.
Hunter got thrown out of the military. He was thrown out, dishonorably discharged.
That's not true. He wasn't dishonorably.
Cocaine use. And he didn't have a job until you became vice president. And once you became vice president, he made a fortune in Ukraine, in China, in Moscow,
that is simply
and various
not
other places.
True.
He
my
made
son,
a fortune.
My son.
And he didn't have a job.
My son, like a lot of people we know at home, had a drug problem. He's overtaken it. He's fixed it. He's worked on it, and I'm proud of him.
But why was he given tens of millions of dollars?
But he wasn't given tens of millions of dollars. That is totally, discredited.
We've already been
totally discredited.
The bottom line to all of this seems to be that the Giuliani conspiracy theory doesn't really add up. But at the heart of this issue, there is a grain of truth that Hunter Biden was making money off his family name while his dad was Vice President of the United States. There is no evidence that Joe Biden did anything to encourage this or anything improper to benefit or protect his son from investigation. But he didn't stop Hunter Biden from cashing in on his position. Does that make Hunter Biden fair game for Trump's attacks? Well, we've also seen allegations of Hunter Biden's use of drugs and making payments to sex workers as well. That came out of his divorce proceedings. It's on the public record. It's now being weaponised by Trump and others. In fact, Trump has tweeted about that and a bunch of other things relating to Hunter Biden more than 50 times since late August, including this.
Russian billionaire wired Hunter Biden $3.5 million. This on top of all the other money he received while Joe was VP, crooked as he can be. But fake mainstream media wants it to just go away.
Well, the problem here really isn't the mainstream media wanting it to go away. It is the lack of evidence to support the $3.5 million payment. It wasn't made to Hunter Biden directly. It was made to a firm which may just have a similar name to the firm he was with. We don't know. There is not enough documentation around it. But right now, they're just trying to throw all of this dirt up there and hope that some of it sticks.
Yeah, and obviously there's a hypocritical angle here as well because the Trump family like to cash in on Trump's success as well. We all know that. But there is no denying that Hunter Biden. I shouldn't say there's no denying. I think it's pretty clear that Hunter Biden has been cashing in off his dad's good name, and I think that sadly is part of Washington. I'm not saying we should throw up our hands and say, they all do it. But you should criticise him for it, but let's criticise him for what he's done and not the fantasy scenario that we.
Yeah, and at the same time, obviously, we learnt from the Trump tax records that were published by the New York Times this week that a lot of foreign governments are putting money into Donald Trump's pocket by holding events at Trump properties at the Washington, D.C. hotel and elsewhere.
And by the way, I should say that Joe Biden, it's not just Hunter Biden. His brother has been cashing in as well. A lot of the Biden family seem to like to cash in on Joe Biden. So I think that Joe Biden should use this opportunity to put forward reforms to stop that, given that he himself is susceptible to having family feeding out of the trough. Then why don't you stop it once and for all? Everyone feeding from the trough. Now, it might be impossible to do it completely, but you can at least try.
Yep.
And I'm not saying he's got nothing like that, but I'd prefer to hear him talk about that than to talk about that's discredited over and over again like a broken record.
Yeah, well, look, there was another controversial debate moment this week. And in fact, it was the final exchange of the night.
Will you urge your supporters to stay calm during this extended period, not to engage in any civil unrest? And will you pledge tonight that you will not declare victory until the election has been independently certified? President Trump, you go first.
I'm urging my supporters to go into the polls and watch very carefully, because that's what has to happen. I am urging them to do it. As you know, today there was a big problem. In Philadelphia, they went in to watch. They were called poll watchers, a very safe, very nice thing. They were thrown out. They weren't allowed to watch. You know why? Because bad things happen in Philadelphia, bad things. And I am urging I am urging my people. I hope it's going to be a fair election. If it's a fair
You're
election,
urging them what?
I am 100% on board. But if I see tens of thousands of ballots being manipulated, I can't go along with that.
Not sure what he's got against Philadelphia, but the president is basically saying that he wants his supporters to go to polling places to watch the vote count and ensure that votes are being counted fairly. A potential recipe for absolute chaos and even possibly conflict on the day. That was too much for Trump's former National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster yesterday, who said that Trump is aiding and abetting Russian President Vladimir Putin's efforts to sow doubt about the American electoral system.
Okay, let me add it. First of all, I'm trying to make this quick. Poll watching is allowed in America. You need to register. They were not allowed in because they were not registered. Simple. It's nothing to do with Philadelphia. All right. Secondly, the other example he brought up during that debate, not in that clip, was about in Pennsylvania as well. Bad things happened in Pennsylvania. They found 9 ballots discarded, 7 of which were unsealed and were for Trump. That became his national case. He went on about it. Kayleigh McEnany went on about it. Oh, look, they're trying to rig the election. Okay, what was going on there was they were military ballots, which look very similar to military requests for ballots. And they often get confused. Someone, it turns out, well, they're still investigating, but this seems to be the case. Someone seems to have confused them, opened them up thinking they were requests for ballots, and the military filled them out incorrectly. You're supposed to put them in a security envelope, inside the envelope, a second envelope, right? They didn't do that. So you could see who they were voting for. That's how we know 7 of them were for Trump. Okay, that immediately invalidates the vote.
Right.
If it doesn't have the second envelope. So which is why the people then threw them out. They shouldn't have thrown them out. They should have filed them properly. But those votes are spoiled, okay, because they didn't have the second envelope. By the way, the Democrats are trying to get rid of that. They're trying to make it, if you don't put in the second envelope, it still counts. Who doesn't want that? The Republicans don't want that. They're stopping that bill going through. So the only reason those votes weren't counted was because of what Republicans want to do. I'll make 2 more quick points about what Trump's doing in creating confusion. The first one is that he likes to talk about the difference between unsolicited mail-in ballots and solicited mail-in ballots. He's saying, oh, in Florida, you request a ballot, whereas in these other states, they just send them out to you, and that's when the corruption occurs. That's the bad mail-in voting. That's what he says, right? Okay, there are 10 states where you get unsolicited mail-in ballots in America. Not everyone, just registered voters, okay? Let me tell you the 10 states. 5 of them have been doing it for ages. That's Colorado, Oregon, Utah, Washington, Hawaii. They're the 5 places that have proper mail-in voting, have had it for ages. No sign of fraud there at all, okay? No one accuses them of fraud. The 5 others are new this year because of COVID. California, Nevada, New Jersey, Vermont, and Washington, D.C. Now, they might be disasters for all we know, but none of them count for the presidential election. That's what they have in common. None of them are swing states. None of them will be relevant on the day. Okay, so even if that becomes a complete disaster, that has nothing to do with the election being rigged. Okay, so let's just put that away, the election being rigged. And he's creating that confusion on purpose, I believe. One more way he's making confusion. He's worried about mail-in votes taking forever, the counting. Oh, it's going to take forever. Okay, the reason for that, in Florida, they do it overnight. You know why? Because they pre-process all the security measures. They make sure that all the ballots are fine before the day, and then on the day they count them with all the other ballots, right? So they can do it really easily. There are a bunch of states where they don't do that. 3 states in particular, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, the 3 key states in this election, by law, are not allowed to even look at a ballot until the night, which means they then have to do security checks and processing after Election Day, and that's what's going to hold everyone up. Okay, the Democrats in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin are trying to change that. They're trying to push back the processing date by a week or 2. So it's going to be like Florida. Guess who is stopping that happening? It's the Republicans. I'm sorry to be partisan about this, but it's just a fact. It's the Republicans in the state legislatures in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin that are stopping it happening. Michigan allowed them to push it back 1 day, and that's it. The other 2 states, they're not allowing it at all. So in those states, they're intentionally creating a situation where there is a delay So, and then Trump is going to complain about that delay as if it's all rigged. And that, to me, is super, super cynical. And I just need to get it out there. There's so much about this mail-in voting is just not a problem, but they're creating a problem so they can complain about it.
All right.
That's enough.
You sit quietly, catch your breath.
Thank you.
Well, after one of the most remarkable weeks in American political history, that is it for this Fireside Chat. There's really only one thing for it. Get on the Terps. We'll see you on Wednesday night for Planet America, 9:30 p.m. on ABC TV.
I can't believe I'm about to do a pep podcast here as well. See you there.